Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's my proud privilege to present to you this very, very august panel right here on stage. I've never shared stage with so many greats at the same time. As we were being introduced, so many doctors, scientists, researchers around us, and to be able to ask them questions is going to be extremely difficult. So let me just begin with introducing once again, because it's important on how we have seen these people, and over the last 1.5 years, I think they're household names because we've been interacting with them while they've been working, and it was quite a revelation when you were talking about what all went behind fighting COVID. The fact is that this country was bewildered, this country was fearful, this country was angry, this country had questions, we were confused, and all of these range of emotions is something that the country was going through, and the media had just one target, which is to turn our guns on the people sitting on this dais, to ask them questions, because many of us didn't understand what was going on between March 2020 and today. My privilege to introduce the principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister, Professor Vijayraghavan. To his right is Dr. Guleria, who all of us know, Director of AIIMS, and I don't know how many billion questions he's answered for us over the last 20 months. Before I come to the author, let me introduce Mr. Rajesh Bhushan, Secretary, Union Health Secretary, Dr. VK Paul. Dr. VK Paul, we've been nasty, we've been asking you all sorts of questions. If you feel like beating us up, we'll be happy to be beaten up by you. But yes, we've had many questions, and the anger of the society through the media was directed towards these people. Dr. Krishna Ella, you're a smiling man. It's difficult to be angry with you, and you're the one who's come out with the solution at the end, so it's difficult to be angry with you, but you're the latest hero. You've beaten all the others. The Bollywood heroes don't count, because now we have Krishna Ella, who's come out with Covaxin, and that's how India recognizes you. But it is my proud privilege to introduce Mr. Balram Bhargava for going viral. Now, Mr. Balram Bhargava, I want to be absolutely candid with you. When this book came out, Going Viral, in the media community, I don't know if you know this, but any clip of an interview where there is something outrageous that is said, or jhagda hota hai, that clip goes viral on social media, and that's the viral we knew till COVID happened to us. Going viral is the story of COVID and how it just took over the country. I want to begin at the point where you mention in your book the Iran example, and you talk about the knotted carpets, and you say that it is so perfectly made, yet they leave a flaw so that the wrath of the gods doesn't befall them, because there has to be some imperfection. During the COVID fight, there were many imperfections. Were they daunting? How did you go through that period when the country was in a state of bewilderment, and you had it upon yourself to answer the questions, to find out solutions to the problems, to find out vaccinations, to begin to answer those questions? So from day one, when you figured out that there was a first infected person, and then what it meant for the rest of the country, how did that happen? How did you convey this information to the powers that be, and how did the journey begin?
First of all, I'd like to put on record that this book is just a small story. There is a story similar story for PPEs, where different ministries have worked. There is a similar story for oxygen. There is a similar story for vaccine delivery. There is a similar story for every aspect of how the police worked, how the Ministry of Home worked, how the Ministry of Textiles worked. So it was a whole of government approach clearly, and it was so ably led by our leadership with his excellent communication at every level. That was phenomenal. Now, in terms of the specific question that you've asked me, that how we were able to convince the leadership at that point in time. Well, we were able to first convince the group of secretaries, then that was presented to the group of ministers, and the group of ministers gave those recommendations to the higher authorities. Before that, and when we were talking of travel restrictions, this is February, March last year, and restrictions at large, we were asked by the senior government people to give us our thoughts on a piece of paper. And we gave them, with the consultation with Dr. Paul and Dr. Guleria, we gave a single piece of paper with just 2 points on it. Impose complete lockdown, and the second was stop all international travel. We presented it to the leadership, the senior people in the government, and they said, you have tremendous clarity of thought. So I said, the three of us out there, we all three went to them, and then they pushed it to the honorable leader of the country, and we were able to make a presentation to him of 5 or 6 slides, and we told him that we are a generation which belongs to the Jai Jawan Jai Kisan generation. When we had the PL 480, we were asked by Lal Bahadur Shastri to miss a meal. We can miss a meal, but we need a lockdown. And I think those were the clinching points at that point.
Well, we can miss a meal, and lockdown is important. So Dr. Paul, let me ask you first, because you're the link between what the doctors, the scientists were saying, and what decision the leadership had to take between you and Mr. Bhushan. The question is that it was a tough call, I'm sure, to impose a complete lockdown. Did it take long? Because many people even today question the length of time between the first case being figured out, discovered on 30th of January, till the lockdown was imposed on, I think, the 24th of March. Some people said lockdown should never have been imposed, but they also said in the same breath that why did we take so long? And then they said that it is because of the lockdown that the economy completely came to a standstill, and poverty and all other related issues came up. So where does the buck stop as far as this decision is concerned, and could there have been any other alternative decision?
2 or 3 parts to your question. Thank you. Firstly, when the need for the lockdown was felt, we knew what was going on in Europe. We knew how such large and strong health system, large in terms of the capacity, were devastated by this unknown disease. Please appreciate the context, that situation, those dark days. And we were at a position where we realized that the virus has entered the nation, and now it is proliferating at an exponential phase. It was an amazing phase which was never there again. It was the R factor of something like 4.5. Amazing. It has never happened. The second wave was maximum 1.5 or 1.4. It was visible that this is ferocious increase, and it was also clear to us that it was moving what we like to call into the community. A particular instance at that time, in that late night meeting, when these deliberations took place and we went in the morning, was that we found that it has entered the slums of Mumbai. And we knew that if it is going to go like this, without tools, without preparedness, it was devastating. And by the way, remember, by this time, a lot of other countries were under lockdown. We knew it was a quote-unquote a best practice of sort. Gives you time, allows the virus chains to be broken. So we had that wisdom. I must say, in hindsight, and based on the mathematical work that has been done, our lockdown was perhaps the most timely lockdown. It happened a little earlier would have been less useful. A little later was a devastation. Look at the Sutra model, which tells you that if we had delayed by 2 weeks, we still would have had a peak like this. It didn't happen. It was gone like this over a period of time with everything clogging up. What happened was, because of this timing, this got flattened like this, and this slide you should say it's not ours. So the timing was right. Now the issue is, what is it that it gave us? A, it gave us an opportunity to prepare better. B, to understand the dynamics of the disease better. And C, to be able to come up with this whole of government approach. We created empowered groups and on which Rajesh can give a better discourse, which became the enablers of the response. So I have gone to public with my document on lockdown lessons that I did. I think lockdown was a necessity. Please tell me which country did not go for lockdown. Lockdown became a necessity in every country, sooner or later. Those who thought it will be required by them, tasted dust. And look at China, the way they did. They would do a draconian lockdown, but they did a lockdown. So no country escaped the need for a lockdown. At some level, India had to do that surgical thing. It was intuitive the time when we went. But I must agree with Dr. Bhargava, the first part of your questions. It clicked at the highest level because of that clarity, sincerity, and the best judgment that a group of us made collectively in a consensual manner. There was so much clarity at that time. I think that made all the difference. Thank you.
That's very well stated. But Mr. Bhargava, Dr. Bhargava, you also say in your book that this is the first pandemic of the century, but certainly not the last. Now, those are ominous words. We haven't really completely gone through this one completely yet, which is why post the festive season, everybody's been just waiting with bated breath, and we have cases coming in from Ladakh as well as Kerala, where cases seem to be rising. When you say this is neither the first nor the last pandemic, are you seeing something that is giving you that indication, and how do you substantiate on that?
Yeah, I think what we have learned from this pandemic, most importantly, is that the government also has learned, and we have also learned, that we have to invest more in public health, number one. Number two, we have to ensure that our ecology, our environment is protected. We should not cut down trees. We've had trees being cut down in forests, bats migrating to cities, and the spread of various diseases. The third point that I want to emphasize is that we have to ensure that we have our systems in place for surveillance, so that the virus is already present. Several viruses are present. We know from the WHO blueprint there are 10 viruses which are dangerous viruses, whether it is Ebola, Marburg, Hendra, and others one, which have a very high mortality, 80-90% mortality. So we have to be careful. They can move easily. And because of the extreme connectivity that we've had now, so much of travel, just before the pandemic, so much of travel that it was very easy for tremendous amount of movement of these kind of, but most importantly, protecting our environment is going to be, in this century, the most important thing.
Professor Vijayraghavan, I want to ask you, there is also a mention of the choice of Bharat Biotech and the reason why it was picked up. I want you to tell us a little bit about what went on. A little, somewhat has been written by Dr. Bhargava. But in a country where tendering processes are important, where choice, why X, why not Y, what were the reasons? How was Bharat Biotech picked up? And what kind of faith you had when the government decided to go with Bharat Biotech for Covaxin?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's very important to keep in mind this is a partnership. This is not a commercial process which was there. Secondly, this was a pandemic in which we had to take rapid decisions. And thirdly, those decisions are taken entirely on the basis of track record and quality. Bharat Biotech has been stellar in working with the government, working with public agencies, and deploying vaccines previously in a manner where their public trust, their scientific credibility, their manufacturing processes are not, in doubt at all. And therefore, I must congratulate ICMR with the speed with which this partnership was put in place. Speed is really of the essence at these times, and having done this fast and learnt various kinds of ways by which it can be done fast and well in a partnership, I think going ahead we have opportunities to ensure that for potential future pandemics we are better prepared by these partnerships, mitigating market risks which companies have by using the strengths which our research institutions have.
So, Dr. Krishna Ella, Bharat Biotech it was. How did it feel to be actually facing expectations of a 1.3 billion people? Because they were looking for some sort of a solution of getting out of this pandemic, and the onus was on you and a couple of other, but you were the indigenously manufactured, you were going to be the indigenously manufactured vaccination. What kind of burden may be the wrong word to say for this, but what kind of pressure did it put on you and Dr. Bhargav to make this not just the partnership work, but the formula work? He spoke about monkeys earlier. This clearly wasn't monkey business alone.
I think, what I say is I was only looking at my employees who are working in the company. That was only one thing for me, priority. Because they're working in a BSL-3 containment and working with a live virus in 1,000 liters fermenters. I mean, that one fermenter can destroy the entire country. One fermenter. That can destroy the entire country. And I think the employees were working, that time there was no vaccine. There was no vaccine. Working with that was the most important. And the second thing I did is not to read a newspaper, not to see the TV channel. So it makes us, focus on our work, not to distract anything. And then switch off the mobiles and not attend any calls and just focus on our work. That's all, because you don't want the energy to go into negative direction. Focus on one direction and move on what you believe in it. And we believe in Indian innovation, and we have done it before also, not only the Covaxin. We have done the rotavirus with the DBT. We have done with the typhoid conjugate, first vaccine in the world. And not even the US has done it, and multinationals have done it. First vaccine in the world. And we are the first one again, chikungunya. And I've been working on pandemic vaccine for last 2006 onwards. Chikungunya, Zika, and pandemic flu. And then COVID now, and then we're working on the NTS for an African point of view. And we have that expertise, so it's not that we don't have an expertise. But what we looked at is, how do you put India in the map? That was the only criteria for us. Okay, we have to be good in science, and we have to be best, and we have to be there in the country, because it's like a defense. You're there, you have a war or not. I mean, you have a defense is like a strategy. Like that, vaccine is going to be a strategy now, in the future. And I think to be there, India have to be there, and because 1.3 billion, nobody is going to save us. We have to save ourselves. I think that's the only game, and I looked at only that, nothing else. Thank you.
And 3rd of November, that was very clear when the WHO actually gave you emergency use clearance. And what did you feel that day? Did both of you have a chat?
I mean, I didn't even look at WHO at all. I was just ignoring on all, because we have 5 vaccines WHO pre-qualified before. We know the process. The only thing we are worried about the media people asking question, when is it, why is it not coming? Why is it not coming tomorrow? Why is it not coming? So I think we looked at one thing. I mean, they were asking with a good intention to see the public to know it. But I think we know that it will come because we know the process. It is going to take time. And so I think nothing. I'm one same thing, whether it's good or bad. I'm the same situation, still smiling. So the smile keeps me alive.
So for every story, the media is the villain.
I'm not saying you're a villain. There are few people are looking at it negatively. See, one, they don't believe in Indian innovation. They believe that only Pfizer can do the vaccine, not Indian company. And so there's a perception. It's like a stock market, like perception in the mind. And I think that is really hurts us, the scientists like us, whether it is Dr. Vijayraghavan or Guleria or Vinod Paul, all of us are scientists here. So we all, it hurts. It hurts us when you look at it, oh, India, look at it cheaply. And today, at least I'm saying, Francis Collins, who is the NIH director, he talks about Covaxin. Thank you very much.
Well, there's nothing like proof of the pudding when it is eaten. Yes, when questions are raised. And that's a very emotional comment that you make, Dr. Krishna Ella. I understand that. I understand where you're coming from, because it would hurt. With so much work going into what it is, with you putting up so much in terms of risk factors, in terms of hard work, in terms of just research and building a strategy, it would hurt. Did it hurt you because you were talking about your normal morning conversations? I'm sure in that phase you were not talking to your wife as much as you were talking to Dr. Krishna Ella. And did it hurt when there were questions that were raised both from the political spectrum and most people like to call it media raising questions, but when they actually want to say that politicians were asking questions, media is normally somebody who gets the axe, but
I think the media has played a very responsible role as well. The questions were asked, yes, by the media, but as you started the evening by saying how the media was asking all those questions, the 1.3 billion people were asked, so you had to ask those questions. From that perspective, the media was, as what Dr. Ella would say, but the flip side is that the media was very responsible in terms of reporting and being transparent about the truth, and therefore we don't see any vaccine hesitancy in this country. Look at what is happening in the Western world, whether it is Europe, whether it is USA, even Japan. The amount of hesitancy that is seen there is not seen in our country, and I think kudos to you and also the ministry and its communication strategy, which has been responsible for it with your media.
Dr. Guleria, many people even today are debating this, and I'd like to dwell on this for a bit. Covaxin has come up. We are proud Indians. Yes, there were moments that shouldn't have happened. The questioning that should not have happened, it did. There was hurt. There were tears. But we've been through all of that. And we today are a country which is talking about 20 crore vaccinations ready and available, 117 crore vaccinations already given to people of India. Post the festive season, what is your prescription? Are we secure? Are we over the hump? Do we need, because the most commonly asked question today is, do we need a third dose at a time, yes, where everybody hasn't got their second, but that is something that's happening abroad, and therefore questions in India are happening. What is your prescription on that?
So to begin with, I'll just add on to what was being previously discussed, that we've had one pandemic before this, and that was in 2009, which was the H1N1 pandemic, so known as swine flu. And at that point in time, we did not have a vaccine. And it created a major issue that we had to rely on WHO to import vaccines. And I don't know whether you remember, the media created a big issue at that point in time, that why is India not making a vaccine? And I think that is a changing point that we're seeing, and that is highlighted in this book, how we've changed from where we were in 2009 to what we've done now, that instead of just manufacturing vaccines, we are doing research and coming out with so many vaccines, not only for COVID, but so many other diseases, which is really the strength of our science and research. And I think this is the proud moment that we have, that we moved from that era of one pandemic to the next, where we are now exporting vaccines and giving it to other countries, where a few years ago we were relying on other WHO to give donations to us. This is what happened during the H1N1 pandemic. So it's a remarkable achievement. Regarding the future, I think what I could say is that as our vaccination program is moving forward, as we are seeing no vaccine hesitancy, and as we are seeing that vaccines are holding out in terms of preventing severe disease, in terms of preventing hospitalization and death, the chance of having any huge wave is declining with each passing day. So I would say that it's very unlikely that we will see a huge third wave, if I put it that way. But the disease will become endemic and we will continue to have cases, which is what we see even with H1N1. We have cases of swine flu which occurs during the monsoon months, it occurs during winter, and then it declines. We do have sick patients also, especially the elderly and the immunocompromised. Same will happen with COVID. We will have some patients who will be sick, but it will not be of the magnitude that we saw in the first and the second wave, and most of us will be protected. Regarding your other question about the booster dose, currently, like I said, the vaccines are holding out. We're not seeing any breakthrough infection causing a huge surge in our admissions. Our seropositivity rate is very high. All of that suggests that as of now, we really don't need a booster dose. We may need it in the future. That is definitely there. But as of now, we don't need a booster dose. We are quite well protected. And I think we should focus on getting more and more people to get the first and the second dose. Because if we have that number in a sufficiently large amount, then we will be more protected as a country.
Mr. Bhushan, there were so many headlines in that one statement, and again the media will be blamed for it. He said H1N1 happened in 2009, and we didn't have a vaccination. Up 2009, we know who was in government. 2020 and 21, we know who was in government. We could make politics out of everything, but here media is in the dock, so I'm not going to do that. And with a panel of doctors and administrators like yourself, I better stick to the straight bowling line. But many people ask this question, that if there was so much work and so much awareness in the medical fraternity about the pandemic, about the way it could spread, and about the lack of facilities, why did we go through a second phase of such a drastic kind, which in more ways than one shook the soul of this nation?
Okay, so I request your indulgence to take off the mask. And before I answer...
indulgence to beat up the media for...
No. In fact, that is what I was going to address first, before coming to the main part of your question. You see, I don't blame the media. For the last year and a half, I've been interacting with the media on a regular basis. And I very firmly believe that if my story is interesting, if my story is relevant, you will have absolutely no option but to carry it. So therefore, why should we blame the media? Our story is in fact not only interesting, it is extremely engrossing. Are we in a position to tell you that story in such a manner that I not only attract your attention, I hold your attention? That is one part. The other part is, our story is relevant. Here is a nation that not only thinks that it can create a vaccine in less than a year's time, it isolates the virus, it makes it available to a private entity without going into this L1 business, मैंने tender नहीं किया, किसका सबसे कम दाम होगा, because our intentions were clear. We did everything in a transparent manner. So, to sum up, we have absolutely no quarrel with you. We think that media plays a crucial role. Media की जो भूमिका है, वो न केवल महत्वपूर्ण है, बल्कि वो बहुत ही क्रिटिकल है. अब हमारे ऊपर है कि हम अपनी कहानी आपको कितने इंटरेस्टिंग तरीके से बताएं और कितने रेलेवेंस के साथ बताएं.
तो ये बताइए कि सेकंड फेज में गलतियां क्या-क्या हुई?
अब आ रहा हूं मैं, उसी पे आ रहा हूं. You see, now very seriously addressing this question, I think when you are nearer to the reality, it is always not very advisable to start pointing out mistakes. Because once you have the advantage of distance and perspective, then you can look back and reflect. Having said that, let me quickly tell you certain issues. Globally, and after this interaction, we are ready to debate this point. Globally, health and public health has remained historically a neglected sector. There were cracks in the system globally, so were there cracks in India. We should have absolutely no hesitation in accepting it. What the pandemic did was shone a light. Like those lights, it brought those cracks into focus. If you are a responsible society, if you are a responsible government, then you must proactively address those cracks, which our country did. Today, we have a 5-year-long focused program to address those cracks. Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Health Infrastructure Mission, ABPM Abhim, 64,000 crores over next 5 years to address in a saturation mode. Testing facilities at block level. Testing facilities at block level. Dr. Bhargav just mentioned how this journey was performed from 1 lab to, 5,000 labs now? 3,000 labs. So we are now saying that we must have labs at the block level so that these diagnostic facilities are free. So if you have to sort of flip it on its head, you can say that lack of availability of diagnostic facilities at the block level did create problems. But being a responsible government, we quickly interacted with people, stakeholders, and decided that this gap needs to be plugged.
Let me ask you, Dr. V.K. Paul. Many people say that we're not talking about an impending wave or a booster shot because politically it might not be viable for us to go in for a booster shot because abhi log baki hain first or second dose dene ke liye, isliye hum nahi kar rahe. Whereas studies have shown that a booster shot or a third shot increases the efficacy in the region of 90s. That's an Israeli study that has come out. So I want to ask you, is this a political question or are we really being advised by the doctor and the scientific community on the booster dose?
Please appreciate the hope when you take a decision for an additional dose, it has to be based on sound information, and there are many aspects to it. For example, it has to be different for different vaccines perhaps. We can plausibly think like that. So a data from Israel for vaccine A may not apply to vaccine Covishield or Covaxin. That's what we are dealing with. What about the duration? Is it 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, or 9.5 months? We don't have the data. People have done studies to say at 6 months, if you give the booster, that's their study, it boosts up the immunity. But did I need it at 6 months? So that's a different kind of science. We assure you that this aspect is very, very systematically and deeply being examined on an ongoing basis, practically on a weekly and a bi-weekly basis. We are looking at the data systematically. We are watching how it has to be done. There are studies being done at this very time by the manufacturers and companies, his as well as Covishield, and they have volunteer follow-ups taking place. There are studies with the THSTI has instituted to look at the natural recipients of the vaccine and track their immunity. So this is work in progress. But please appreciate that as of now, the vaccine priority for any nation for a booster happens once you have given the 2 doses to a large population. If that work is not complete, the new entrants create a problem. And of course, on a different dimension, there is also a moral dilemma that there are people who are waiting to receive the first few doses, and you go out and use your energy to give another dose to some people who are more vocal about it. So the short answer to this is it's a scientific journey. You all know that from most nations and even WHO, we are still in the gray zone of finding out the right moment the right timing, and the right stage at which of the national vaccination program when boosters have to be given. This is work of science, and please have faith in us. We don't have a dearth of vaccines now. We can work it out. And in any case, the boosters don't have to be given to the entire population tomorrow. It will be timed according to when you received it. It can be panned out. It's not a catastrophe in that sense. And we have the capacity with the vaccine, the stockpile that we have. But it has to be done once the science says it should be done, and we assure you that is exactly the work that we are doing on, I would say, bi-weekly basis. The last time we met is only 24, 36 hours ago.
Dr. Krishna Ella, from a private entrepreneur's point of view, how was your experience in dealing with the government in a situation of this crisis? We've known governments to take time in decision making. We've known governments to go through various procedures. They have their own justifications, but we on the other side of the table feel that it just takes too long. During the pandemic, what was your experience, and how would you like to describe this experience at, where this partnership between government and the private sector was happening?
I think you are frankly speaking, Kumar. So I think, frankly, I'm telling you honestly, this is the first time I've seen the government is working in a much more better than even a private sector, honestly. The government sector worked much more harder than a private sector. I'm admitting on that. And I think they worked, day and night. And I've seen Vinod Pal and Vijayraghavan, and everybody was there at even late night and 11, 12. And DCG office working in the 1 a.m. and all that, approvals coming at 1, 2 a.m. and all that. And my colleagues were also working, not me, but my colleagues were working. So they were also receiving all the letters. But I think first time I've seen the government has had a sincere interest. Intentions are very good, clean, and they just want to do for the country. So I think government was proactive. I can tell you all the officers here, including Rajesh Bhushan, is there till 11:30, 12 o'clock in the night.
Did you ever think you would do that when you joined government, sir? Was that the norm when you joined as a probationer, maybe?
We have video calls at 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m.
I had not visualized this, and I often tell my colleagues here, most of them are here, some of them are sitting there, that for the last year and a half, we've been living inside a pressure cooker. A lot of people, use that phrase, but our pressure cooker somehow is not letting the steam out. Uski seeti nahi baj rahi hai. As a result,
वो काम हम कर रहे हैं.
So yes, relentless pressure. But what it teaches us is that if you keep the office atmosphere, the atmosphere of your organization informal, if you are, easily accessible, and you are talking to, your stakeholders more, like Dr. Bhargava talked to Dr. Ella more than probably his wife, someone said that. So I think that also has a very critical role to play, because the people who are working with you, they also feel that they are contributing to something big. So that is one. And let me also underline the fact that this journey has been also full of grief. In the Ministry of Health, in last year and a half, in the main ministry, we lost 16 of our colleagues, 16. So while there has been sadness, apprehension, grief, personal problems, in spite of all that, people have stuck together because their superiors have extended support, their colleagues have extended support, the political leadership has extended support, and media has extended support. Thank you.
Well, I think that deserves a big round of applause for this country called India, where when there's a crisis, everybody stands together. And Dr. Bhargava, you do speak about the fact that many of your colleagues had to stay. There were guest houses, there was no travel, they have families back, they were from outstation, and they just camped here with you. What was the myriad of emotions and problems and all these, the world at large, as I said at that time, was very emotionally charged up, and there were more brickbats than there were bouquets coming your way. How did you handle that at a personal level?
Well, as far as our scientists is concerned first, I think they have been fantastic. I mean, hats off to them. No one even uttered anything of that they were disappointed, they did not want to do this. I think they were so proactive. I mean, from the headquarters, we had initially Dr. Ganga Khetkar, then Dr. Samiran Panda took over, and Dr. Nivedita has been there all along, like a general in the army. She was responsible for taking the whole thing, the whole fight at the headquarters level. And then the NIV was there. I mean, the consciousness that they had towards their country, towards their job, I think it is a salute to them, clearly. So the support that I got was absolutely fantastic. And I think this support has been from my family, from my brother, from my sisters, from all of them. It has been so much that, I mean, I get emotional when this happens, when you ask this question. The support not only during the pandemic, but throughout my career at All India Institute and beyond.
Dr. Guleria, at any point, with the kind of pressures there were on the health system, did doctors feel overwhelmed कि अब नहीं संभलेगा, बहुत ज़्यादा है, क्या करें, too much pain, too much grief around?
No, I don't think so. I think what is remarkable is that the healthcare workers, and this is not only at AIIMS but across the country, were there right from day one, and none of them really backed out. If you really look at the stories that have come out from healthcare workers, many of them exposed themselves and to save patients. We had the story of one of our residents who took off his PPE because a tube had come out and he had to re-intubate a patient while the patient was being transferred in an ambulance. So such stories and such activities that were done by a large number of healthcare workers is really remarkable.
Dr. Paul, I want to ask you again on this question. From here, where do we go? We have a co-vaccine, we have Covishield, we have a festival season that's just past us, we have elections that are coming, we have children who haven't been to school for a very long time, colleges haven't really opened up, schools opened up for a wee bit, tiny window, and then the pollution got them back inside. How do you deal with this? Because, you have to take that call in terms of your advisory to the political bosses. What would you recommend of life from here on?
First and foremost, that the pandemic is not over, that there could be pandemics within pandemics. If the virus happens to choose its characteristics to a different dimension, all our preparations could be dented, to say the least. But in a reasonable scenario, we could visualize a situation where, yes, we could move toward endemicity. Yes, we are better prepared, both on the infrastructure. We didn't talk about infrastructure, the phenomenal increase in infrastructure, ICU beds, this, that we created. We are better prepared there. We are better prepared because so many of us are now fully vaccinated. If there is a need for more vaccination as boosters or for pediatric, there will be choices. India is ready for that kind of a need. It can be done when it is needed by science. So we are in a much better prepared position. But please, let's not lower the guard at all. Please, let's not give up this mask. We still need it because vaccines are useful up to a point. And one other element which we still don't have optimally in our arsenal is a potent drug. We are seeing some drugs coming up. But let's say, hope that they will become formalized. We need a medicine which can ensure that the mild disease does not become severe. That gap still exists.
Dr. Bhargav, we've been through from hydrochloroquine to remdesivir to, shortages of various medicines, which today we are saying don't even impact, controlling or, forget curing COVID-19. Do you think because of panic we went through those phases, or do you think they were effective on those strains of the virus and are not effective now anymore because the strain of the virus has changed? And are we, I mean, it's difficult to predict, of course, the mutations in the virus, but are we close to any dangerous mutation in the near future?
In terms of the treatment aspects that you've alluded to, the whole world was learning. We were learning, the whole world was learning. We had certain drugs which were available, which were on the shelf, which were manufactured in India, which had some antiviral properties in the laboratory. Whether they worked on the patient, we did not know. But they were safe. So we tried them. The world tried them. The world learned that they are not working. The world dumped them. Similarly, newer drugs like remdesivir came. We found that, yes, hospitalization was slightly reduced from 14 days to 10 days. At that point in time, there was shortage of that. Later on, we realized that it has no influence on the mortality. But having said that, what we have learned from different parts of the world, and that is what I mentioned, was steroids are working. They have been time tested. And there was a randomized trial conducted in the UK. And that was the UK contribution to this fight. We demonstrated that this convalescent plasma is not working. So please do not use it. That was India's contribution. WHO did a solidarity trial that remdesivir is not working. And that was a multi-country trial. That was a contribution. So every country has tried to make some contribution, but these are the three which I could say have really made a dent in terms of how COVID has to be treated. In terms of the last point that you're saying, in terms of mutants, there are several. When the virus is under pressure, it mutates. So there are several theories on why the virus is under pressure. So we should not let the virus come under too much pressure so that it mutates. We've seen the Delta variant sweep the world, and it's still playing havoc in many countries. We've seen that Delta variant consumed in India, and the vaccines are working against all these variants. Currently, they're all working. We're in constant touch with Bharat Biotech. We constantly exchange knowledge regarding which viruses are emerging, which are the variants that are emerging. And he is constantly thinking how to make a vaccine which is with the new variant, and that is an ongoing process. And I think that the good times for India has started by this relationship.
Well, that's a positive note. Thank you, Mr. Balram Bhargava, for this very, very interesting book. Good read for anybody who wants to know the backstory of how Covaxin came into being. There is a backstory on all the politics, and I'm sure at least one of the panelists on this panel will write another book on that one. Thank you so very much to this very august panel for joining me on this discussion. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this enthralling session with Dr. Bhargava. Many, many congratulations to you for your book.